After 4 decades and 52 films, Tom Cruise remains one of Hollywood's last true stars. Someone whose mere presence in a movie will put your butt in a seat, but it comes at a cost. To stay relevant in the era of multiversal mishigas and green screens galore, Cruise has transformed from a cocktail-flipping, truth-handling, sexy vampire into a stuntman extraordinaire, testing the limits of what's humanly possible in cinema without relying purely on pixel-pushing processing power. But no matter how many bones he breaks or airplanes he jumps out of, Cruise simply can't save cinema single-handedly. Like all geniuses, he needs a rival that will push him further, upping the ante of extravagant stunts and stunning sequences, especially when it comes to IMAX. A Salieri to his Mozart, a Gary Oak to his Ash Ketchum. In short, he needs a Christopher Nolan. The British director pioneered the practical modern IMAX spectacle, and for the last 15 years, Nolan has continued to push the boundaries of practical stunts, with Cruise hot on his heels. Both men have made the most of the larger-than-life IMAX format, photographing outrageous stunts that easily justify the extra cost of seeing them on the largest, clearest, and loudest screen possible. The unofficial game of one-upsmanship between the short king superstar and dapper director will take your breath away. So, hold my hand as we step into the danger zone for Cruise versus Nolan, the battle for the best IMAX stunts. Sorry, I had to. It all began in 2008, a time of hope and change. The MCU had just begun with Iron Man, Cruise's career was at a low point after the mediocre MI3, and a very intense Australian taught us all to laugh.
It's gone.
The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan's sophomore swing at the Cape Crusader, changed the game forever, and as the first major film to shoot large sections on IMAX, the director needs some larger-than-life action to fill all that extra celluloid. Literally, IMAX film is nearly 4 times the size of good old 35mm, perfect for projecting on screens as tall as 7 stories. Nolan quickly became a disciple of the larger format, and The Dark Knight was a perfect platform to show it off. He robbed a bank, brooded on some rooftops, and Fulton extracted a fugitive from a Hong Kong skyscraper. But none of that compared to a singular stunt that even his hyper-competent team thought was impossible.
In pre-production, Chris Nolan kept challenging everybody to come up with ideas of how we could beef up these action sequences and try to do something that nobody had ever done before. And this idea came up to flip this 18-wheeler over without use of CGI.
The film's special effects supervisor Chris Corbould didn't think the stunt was possible and pleaded with Nolan to consider using a smaller vehicle.
I had real strong reservations that we would achieve that, and I kept niggling at Chris about how we could compromise it and make it slightly different but more achievable. And in the end I said, look, I'm going to do a test and I'm going to try this once.
Corbould's team built a massive, dynamite-propelled piston to launch the trailer into the air, with only a heavily reinforced cab protecting veteran stunt driver Jim Wilkie from becoming a stain on the asphalt. They tested it twice in a parking lot with minimal deviation, but that's a far cry from shooting on the streets of downtown Chicago. They had one chance. The crew set up 7 cameras, 4 of which were hulking IMAX bad boys, each the size of a mini fridge, to film the shot from as many angles as possible. All Wilkie had to do was hit his mark. Nolan and his DP captured some truly incredible footage, but that's only half the battle. The editing room is where they made it look real, and they conveyed the crash in only 2 shots.
Back in the day, with multiple camera angles of stunts, you would double cut and try and, stretch an event. The technique, I think, now is that we do stretch and double cut, but not obviously. So when the truck flips, for example, we're using only 2 angles. Now, back in the 80s, I probably would have used all 5.
As thrilling as it is to fully go commando, it's the understated edit that keeps the stunt grounded in reality, and more importantly, holds the scene's focus squarely on Batman and the Joker. Now, before we get to the conclusion of Nolan's trilogy, complete with the single action scene the director is most proud of to this day, we've got to check in on our boy Tom Cruise, because he's running up and down the walls. As the ostentatious aughts turned to the terrible tens, IMAX was becoming the biggest thing since CinemaScope, and Tom Cruise wanted in on the action. After J.J. Abrams' forgettable third entry in the Mission Impossible series, Cruise hooked up with director Brad Bird to refocus the franchise on what really matters, putting Tom's life in danger for our momentary amusement. Their biggest inspiration? The Dark Knight, of course. Their mission, should they choose to accept it, dangle world-famous movie star Tom Cruise out of the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa.
Suddenly my eyes just snapped open and I realized the star of our movie is like swinging around on the outside of the tallest building in the world, held on by like a tiny wire. And I just kind of went, "Ugh!"
And while the actor is clearly capable of, well, anything, you don't just start running down the side of a 2,700-foot skyscraper without a little practice. While Tom spent months training on a soundstage replica under blazing hot lights, the production took over some unfinished floors of the Burj itself, smashing out 35 windows to make room for safety equipment, crew, and camera cranes, all for a 10-minute sequence. And even though IMAX cameras are absolute units, the film itself is so big they could only hold enough to shoot 3 minutes at a time. That means the helicopters flying around the shoot had to constantly land back at the base to refill their film magazines, all while Tom Cruise was strapped into a harness with zero circulation in his legs as he climbed and scrambled around at an altitude taller than the Empire State Building. It took a massive amount of coordination, competency, and chutzpah to pull it all off, but the crystal clear cameras provided a sense of realism that even the director didn't anticipate.
Reflections in the glass have moving things in them, like cars and stuff like that, and then they're actually reacting to the pressure of Tom's hands. And it's the kind of detail that you would never think to get in effects, and if you did do it, it would be tremendously expensive.
Cruise's death-defying leap to IMAX proved that practical stunts were alive and well. Nolan just needed to top it. So, taking inspiration from the original action bad boy James Bond, he paid homage to License to Kill with an iconic sky heist that became the stuff of mimetic legend. As you might have guessed by now, this stunt involved immense amounts of multidiscipline collaboration, incorporating live-action aerial stunts, miniatures, and a rotating airplane interior set that could tilt, pitch, and roll. But all the prep work in the world can't fully prepare you for a shoot in the middle of the sky.
With Chris Nolan, as much as we can physically do inside of that lens is where he would like to go. We had them on the outside of the aircraft, shooting through the windows, and it was a big thing to come together.
Now, there's still some computer trickery involved here. Those are real stunt performers hanging from an actual fuselage thousands of feet above sea level, but the plane tail is a combination of CGI and miniature work. But the coolest shot of all, the one where Bane disengages from the plane, that's all real, baby. With all the wild stunts he's pulled off before and since the sky heist, the sequence is still so thrilling and impressive that it's no wonder Nolan himself says it's the scene he's most proud of. And let's face it, doing anything on a plane is impressive. I feel accomplished if I can read a book on one, but for folks like Nolan and Cruise, the action is on the outside. After both men made a brief sojourn into sci-fi, Cruise with the forgettable Oblivion and the awesome Edge of Tomorrow, Nolan with the gorgeous special effects heavy but relatively stunt-free Interstellar, Cruise returned to the IMAX screen with a vengeance for the fifth Mission Impossible film, Rogue Nation. Like most MI movies, the action sequences are always way more memorable than the plot. For me, this is the one where Tom Cruise dangled from an A400 Airbus 5,000 feet in the air. Now, of course, a lot of things can go wrong here. The plane manufacturer had grave doubts about the stunt's feasibility.
Airbus did not know for certain that the plane could structurally deal with what we were considering.
We basically looked at you like you were crazy.
But the real danger wasn't Tom falling thousands of feet to a grisly death. The biggest risk came from the wind and debris flying at that famous kisser. It'd be like the time a bird broke Fabio's face on a roller coaster, only with even more earth-shattering consequences.
Any particle that could hit me, even a small little rock.
If it was sucked into the propeller and hit Tom, it would be traveling at the speed of a bullet.
If that goes into my eye, it's going to go through my eye.
Of course, you can't have your movie hero closing his eyes or wearing dorky goggles. That's not what people paid to see. So instead, Cruise wore custom-made contacts that covered his entire eyeballs. An extremely uncomfortable experience that lasted for 8 takes over 10 days and resulted in 90 seconds of unforgettable IMAX action.
Seems like he enjoyed it.
And why wouldn't he? At the end of the day, he was still on the outside of a state-of-the-art cargo plane with all the bells and whistles of modernity, which was not the case for the vintage dogfights in Dunkirk. Even with Top Gun setting a new bar for on-screen aerial combat, the dogfights in Nolan's 2017 war thriller just hit differently. Partly because a whopping 70% of the movie was shot in IMAX, and partly because in his relentless pursuit of realism, Nolan managed to secure 4 80-year-old fighters, including 3 of the last remaining legendary Supermarine Spitfires. In their primes, Spitfires could fly well over 350 miles per hour, so it's not like the stunt pilots were pushing the limits of the ancient aircraft. Unfortunately, while they were great at shooting down the Luftwaffe, they were never intended to house extremely heavy IMAX cameras, so they did what any ingenious crew would do.
We started to invent stuff.
The Grip team designed a versatile mount that allowed these hulking cameras to be positioned on the World War II fighters to capture a variety of dramatic shots, including these cowl shots and tail shots of the Nazi plane in hot pursuit. And while no original aircrafts were destroyed during the making of the film, plenty of flightless replicas were. After all, what goes up must come down, and when a fighter had to make a landing in the drink, the planes were either dropped from cranes or launched from a barge. The production actually lost a very, very expensive IMAX camera during production because one of the planes sunk too fast. Was it worth it? For historical accuracy, authenticity, or just plain awesomeness? The answer is, of course, to all three. Not to be outdone, Cruise himself learned to fly for Mission Impossible Fallout. Not planes, mind you. He got his pilot's license way back in '94, but he figured he might as well fly the helicopter himself during the outrageous inverted flip portrayed in the film. And that's not even the nuttiest stunt he did in that movie. He spent 4 weeks skydiving up to 8 times every day, honing his skills for the high altitude, low open, or halo jump, the first actor to ever perform one on screen. He jumped from a plane traveling 160 miles per hour at 25,000 feet in the air, accompanied by an aerial photographer who had to perform the exact same choreography for probably way less money, and with a 20-pound IMAX camera strapped to his head. So, who's the real hero here?
And I have to be within 3 feet of him. 3 feet, not 2.5, not 3.5. It has to be 3 feet.
Typical halo jumpers require a mil-spec oxygen mask so they don't suffocate at such a staggering altitude. But the man didn't jump out of a plane for weeks on end just to cover up his face and leave plausible deniability for a stunt double. When you pay to see a Tom Cruise movie, you're paying to see Tom Cruise, which is why the production built a unique new helmet from scratch to showcase that famous smile. Now, could you have pulled all of that off with a green screen? Sure. But the day Tom Cruise velcros up in a mocap suit is perhaps the day that cinema truly dies. Besides, sometimes CGI is way more expensive than getting out in the real world and just doing the damn thing. Case in point, the 747 crash in TENET. Despite Christopher Nolan's passion for IMAX practicality, even he has his limits. No way would you actually buy and crash a jumbo jet just for a few seconds of film, right? Originally, he planned to use miniatures, sets, and VFX to pull it all off, but after crunching the numbers, he realized that it'd be far more efficient to buy a real plane and do the whole thing in camera. After all, there's a lot involved in the sequence. You need actors in the plane and on the runway, establishing shots, and everything else needed to ground the scene in reality. And once you've got your retired 747 all dressed up and ready for shooting, is it really that much more effort or expense to blow it up?
One of the first things I asked Chris was, how big do you want the plane? He laughed, and I said, I think I can get you a real plane.
According to Popular Mechanics, a brand new 747 could cost upward of $400 million. A used but still flight-worthy model would run you a cool 16 mil. But for a film where all it needs to do is explode in spectacular fashion, you can snag an empty shell from a salvage yard for a paltry $100 grand. That's a bargain compared to what a single CGI explosion would cost, and it looked a whole lot cooler to boot. Filmed at a real working airport in California, the crew rigged a tow rope through the plane and pulled it into the hangar with 2 massive tow trucks, praying that the old plane's brakes would hold. With a few prayers and some perfectly timed pyro, the practical stunt resulted in an image that will endure far longer than the somewhat muddled story of Tenet.
Just think, yeah, would be cool in a movie. And then you get to set and it's like, yeah, we've got a 747 and we're crashing it into a building. That's how we're achieving the 747 crashing into a building. It feels very, very real, essentially because it is real.
Nolan's dedication to practical stunts is peerless, and I'm sure after his brief sojourn into biopics with Oppenheimer, he'll be right back to raising the bar for action cinema. But at the end of the day, no matter how hands-on a director is, they're not exactly in the pilot seat themselves. That's why we've got to hand this one to Tom Cruise, who clearly exhibits The flight stuff. How do you top Top Gun? The aerial action of the Tony Scott classic reached heights that no other film dared for 36 years, only to be eclipsed by its long-awaited sequel. Cruise, a passionate pilot who owns his very own vintage P-51 fighter, insisted on maximum reality. No stunt doubles, no CGI, just actors inside actual cockpits under insane acceleration forces. Much like his character Maverick, Cruise mentored the young cast and prepared them for the sights and sounds of the skies. But even a motivational speech from the king of couch jumping can't prepare you for 8 Gs crushing your body and squeezing the breath from your lungs. And once the stunt is over, it's up to you to fix your hair and makeup and check the lighting for the next take, because you can't exactly squeeze a glam squad into an F-14 Tomcat, which itself proved a problem, since there are literally no functioning F-14s left in the United States, and the ones that can still fly are actually owned by Iran. The production team managed to find one at the San Diego Air and Space Museum and shipped it piece by piece 500 miles away so it could be towed behind a plane that actually had an engine. That's a lot less glamorous than the spanking new FA-18 Super Hornets the Navy happily provided, at a cost of $11,000 an hour, by the way. But you simply can't have a Top Gun movie without the iconic Tomcat, no less than you could do it without the iconic Tom Cruise. Sure, things are a little different now. The Cold War is over, the pilots aren't all dudes, and the action is coming at us in absurdly clear 18K IMAX resolution, but the constant, as always, is Cruise. Creatives like Tom and Chris are a rare breed in Hollywood these days. In the post-pandemic world, studios are increasingly relying on crowd-pleasing celebrity cameos and green screen setups that essentially let celebrities work from home like the rest of us schlubs. It's making cinema seem less special somehow, but Cruise, Nolan, and the next generation of filmmakers they've inspired continue to take risks, do the work, and dazzle us with powerful practical set pieces. Will Tom Cruise and Christopher Nolan save cinema? Maybe. If they did a movie together, definitely.